Welcome to SBME Interfaces. Our goal with this show is to introduce you to the people that interface with biomedical engineering, from students and faculty to staff and industry and everyone in between. BME is a broad field that encompasses so many different perspectives, journeys, skill sets, and backgrounds, and we are excited to share them all with you.
So we're very excited today to be interfacing with Dr. Sally Thorne. She's a professor of nursing, associate dean, faculty affairs, and faculty applied science, former director, School of Nursing. When she finds time, she does research as well in the clinical research, chronic illness, cancer experience, end-of-life care. She sat on and sits on numerous boards of directors, is a fellow of both the American Academy of Nursing and Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. She's been inducted into numerous organizations and has received honorary doctorates from Queen's University and Université Laval.
So welcome, Dr. Thorne. Thank you very much for doing this. And considering the last year, I think it was an important thing to start with. I have to believe your work on nursing and end-of-life care has become even more important and even more relevant than it normally is. And so has the pandemic given you any insight or more perspective on these areas that you focused on?
Well, I think for everybody and anywhere in healthcare, COVID shed a new light on things, and particularly the power of uncertainty and how difficult that is for populations in making decisions. We've certainly found that at the university, certainly in the healthcare system. From a nursing perspective, absolutely, I think that we have recognize that decision-making in healthcare is not always in the right place. And we are so fortunate in British Columbia to have been in a province in which there's an evidence-based, thoughtful, and transparent public health policy, which we greatly appreciate. So many other jurisdictions haven't had that. But that social complexity of how you do healthcare is absolutely fundamental, and we must pay attention to it going forward.
That's great. So taking it a bit more back, what motivated you to pursue nursing?
Oh, a bit of a personal story, but that was, I'm quite old, and in the 60s, I hadn't really thought of a good plan, and nursing was something I could get into at that point. Had not had any intelligent thoughts of being a nurse. However, I was really captivated by it very quickly and began to understand the tremendous possibilities for being able to make a difference in human lives. And that's sustained me throughout a whole long career.
That's fantastic.
Is that what took you into like the part that, like, reading up about you, I was so deeply fascinated about your turn into end-of-life care, and also in particular the philosophy of science. Is that just like a follow-on from you chasing nursing?
Yes, I think that one of the things that attracts many nurses to that profession is the intimacy of the human contact during those times in life that most people might only get to see on television. But that real sense that you as a human being can engage with knowledge and skills, with science, with philosophy, with all kinds of things in those most complex aspects of life. And certainly not just on the one-to-one, I'm here taking care of you today as you're going through a dying process with your family, but to be able to create the knowledge that allows us to do that. And that has to bring it up to policy knowledge, which is why many of us get involved in the research we do to advance the policy that creates the conditions under which people can do what they need to do.
That's great. You've been part of UBC a long time as a student and an academic and administrator. What makes this place special to you?
Oh, it's the best university. I can't believe my good fortune to have landed here. It's a place that really values excellence, and also, unlike some other places that value excellence, it's a human community. I just feel the strongest human connection with my School of Nursing community, but I've also incredibly enjoyed the applied science, the Faculty of Applied Science community. And just a factoid from my own history, my father was the Dean of Engineering at University of Toronto. So I grew up in an engineering department, and I knew the species of engineers. So it's been absolutely delightful for those of us in applied science to be able to think about what's our unique thing. We see problems and we bring knowledge knowledge and skills to bear to try and solve them. So it's been a great joy to be part of this faculty. And then I also feel that in the wider university, we know one another over time. We develop strategies that I believe in, and we function as a community. We're not always perfect, but we're always wrestling to try and do things as well as we can. So I feel incredibly fortunate to have landed here and had the opportunity to stay as long as I have.
That's a cool tidbit about your father. I did my undergrad at U of T Engineering a few years back, so that's fantastic. Just to build up on, it's unique to me, and maybe there's others, but to have School of Nursing under Applied Science, is this
Yes.
unique firstly to UBC, and what's the advantage or the uniqueness that brings?
Yes, it is. I think it's the only place in the world in which nursing is a subset of engineering. It's because the interesting story there is after World War I and the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918-19, the woman who at that time was the director of nursing of Vancouver General was able to convince the government of the day that to solve complex public health problems, you needed to have a knowledgeable nursing workforce. So for the first time in Canada, nursing came into UBC in 1919. And at that time, there was only three choices. One was arts and science, and they knew that that wasn't the faculty, that it wasn't an art and science, agriculture, and they didn't think that was the right place. And the third was applied science. So it was put as a placeholder with the intention that over time it would evolve. And I don't know, some 40 years later or so, medicine came along, and there were talks over time as to whether that would be the right fit. But as medicine evolved, nursing realized it actually needed to have that autonomy of being able to be self-directed. And so there have been Senate debates about placement of nursing, all kinds of things over those years. And we have always stayed. There have been times when nursing wanted to leave. There have been other times when the options were not appropriate and we pulled back. Right now, I think nursing feels at this point in history that it's been a very fortunate position because we're a very strong school of nursing with a strong sense of ourselves as having a distinctive contribution to healthcare. And we've been able to fulfill that as part of a Faculty of Applied Science.
You're almost used to be your own faculty, I would suspect.
Well, yes, but we would be a small faculty. This has always been the challenge. And UBC has not created a new faculty since somewhere in the 70s. It is not one of the universities that grows small faculties. And in fact, I think the trend in the world would be to amalgamate faculties. So to be a vibrant and meaningful part, to have an active role in a larger faculty that has a voice in the university is actually a pretty good place. And, at least for now, I think I can speak for my nursing colleagues to say we're happy to be there.
Perfect.
I think too that it's kind of an important redefinition of nursing, right? It's putting it in the light that it deserves. It is an applied science, is it not? Like it is. Equal parts, like the technical side of medicine, but also philosophically speaking, right? Like there's a social science here. So I know I really like that uniqueness. I think that's important. I think it provides power to that.
Yes. One of the features of nursing is that it shamelessly will borrow knowledge from any discipline. Wherever there is excellent knowledge, whether it's social sciences or medical sciences or technical sciences, if there's a way to solve a problem that affects people and populations' health, nursing will do that, which is why nursing over time has certainly evolved into looking at technological options, for example, social public policy options. All of these are part of the nursing lens.
It's funny, that actually speaks into one of the things we wanted to ask you is it's obviously both a very rewarding and challenging profession. How do you see that reward and challenge adapting as more technology enters the clinical domain and more complex therapies emerge and like longer living populations, all these sort of unknowns? How do you see that evolving?
Oh, I think, for example, with precision medicine, which is evolving dramatically from sort of standardized groups into much more precise ways of handling individual complex health issues such as cancer and other chronic diseases, what they're realizing is that even the way we convey an idea about evidence is not that 80% of people with your grouping of condition will do well, but your genetic material tells us something about you. And that kind of communication is even very difficult within medical practice. How to shift from a way of, generations of ways of thinking about how we do research and how we communicate. And so it's nurses very often that are at the interface. There may be somebody else that says, you've got this disease and this is the treatment, but there are conversations that will go on over the next course of time. Sometimes in the middle of the night. And that is the business of nursing often, is to do that translation between the science and the human experience, to be looking at who's this human being in this particular context, what are their needs and concerns and desires, what's their cultural context, what's their history, what are their fears, and how does that link up, what knowledge do they need. So I think that the role for nursing is in the human communication part, which is what I study, incredibly interesting. Many of my colleagues are partnering more often these days with engineers and others doing technological interventions as well. Some fabulous interventions having to do with, using video technology to work with people with dementia who are in great distress because they feel some kind of deep need for their family. And with video technology, you can create that sense of being close to family. So there's some really neat things that are being done. And I think that we also would say that as the world of technology evolves, and as our colleagues in medical science and in engineering are understanding that there will be a human interface, we can work creatively with them to ensure that how does it actually work in practice in the actual conversation is part of the design of the study.
Fascinating. Something that's personal interest to me is when faculty transition into more administrative domains of the university. And so you've both helmed the School of Nursing, you've now been part of the Dean's Office. What were drivers for you to pivot and do that?
I'm one of those individuals who didn't seek out those positions, but got dragged into them. And the reason is that I actually love the research and teaching, which is the fundamental. I love service, but the fundamental role of the faculty member is a wonderful role, and I was hesitant to give that up. I'm, as you can tell, very committed to my discipline and its contribution to the world. So I was not keen on taking a role that would force me out of that, and my choice was always, and still is, that at least half of me sits squarely in my disciplinary work, and I can contribute in that way. And that was certainly possible during my time as director, and I've been delighted and very much appreciative that in my role as the associate dean, I'm not simply doing university administration, which to me would not be as satisfying a role, but I can do that in the context of also having a strong foot in the disciplinary work. And I think that's the advantage of some university positions. I would not want to be at the university president or somewhere that is so intensely involved that couldn't happen personally. But I admire people who do, and I think that for people who take on how to run a world-class university in the modern world and do it in a creative and humane and forward-thinking way, great admiration for them. It's not a choice for me.
Yeah, that's great.
Is there anything you miss? Anything that you you had to leave it behind that you would love to pick up again, or you're just completely fulfilled where you are?
Well, I'm lucky. I do have a lot of energy, and I've been able to maintain a pretty active role in research and teaching. Well, one could always do more. There's always more things, but I have actually very few regrets. I've been lucky enough to be in positions where I can say yes to those opportunities where I think my particular lens can make a contribution to the profession, nationally or internationally as well as locally. So I've been extremely fortunate and well supported at UBC, being able to serve the university on the one hand, but also not have to give up that which I really value.
There was a course that I don't know if you still teach called Nursing 502, Ethics and Politics of Nursing. Can you elaborate a bit more what that course is about?
Oh, I think that it's a course that really brings together some of that policy context, that complex policy context of how policies get created, who gets voice. combines things like social determinants of health and what's nursing's historic role with public health and enacting those, and how we can influence, how we can collectively influence those places of policy. And frankly, I think British Columbians have been seeing that acted out quite strongly in the public press, where John Horgan steps back and says, "Here's the experts, listen to them." But that is very rare. I got to tell you, that's very rare in the history of health policy, that those who hold the expertise. Then, frankly, Dr. Bonnie Henry has a lot of nursing in her. A lot of that sense of the human complexity. She's not taking pressure to come up with the easy answers. She's evolving, teaching us all the time, not afraid to change course if the evidence shifts. And that very much does represent the kind of style of engaging that would be very well supported by nursing. And that's the kind of activity that course would be guiding people toward. And it's offered at the master's level for those that are moving into increasing leadership roles in various domains of nursing.
Do you see more and more, do you see more and more nurses now pursuing graduate degrees and thinking about academic careers? Is that shifting?
Yes, quite a few nurses do pursue academic careers. They don't pursue it right out of baccalaureate. They tend to go into the practice field. The ones we get at graduate school tend to be those that have been spotted as potential leaders. They've been challenged with responsibilities, and they've recognized that they don't quite have enough tools to be able to solve those policy problems, to be able to make things happen differently. So they come frustrated. They love what they do, but they're frustrated, come expecting us to give them the tools and resources they need to go and make a difference. So they really challenge the faculty, and I think they come away much more equipped to be leaders. And those that come back, often after more practice time at a later point to do PhDs, are those who really want to invest in using research more strategically to make a difference. So there are a little bit different patterns of graduate education in nursing than there are in other disciplines. Right. They don't graduate with PhDs at the age of 25. They're more likely in their 40s by that point, but they've built it on a really solid career of leadership.
Right.
It sounds like then to really make a difference the way that you want to and the way that you are training people to, that communication is a big part of it, right? Is to frankly eliminate the what I would call the political filter between you and the public and the science and the public. Is there other roads or inroads to that to improve that?
Well, I think that every nurse in any context would recognize communication as a hugely important part of their role, because we're always in the business of taking an individual who comes out of their own understandings, as flawed or unusual as they may be, their own experience and those fears and things that they can't necessarily surface, but that are influencing their behavior, and trying to guide them with an ability to interpret the information that they're being given, often highly scientific and technical information, often highly confusing and not necessarily clear. And that evolves over time as it evolves in the social complexity of their families and communities and changing conditions and that sort of thing. So that level of communication is absolutely fundamental to nursing practice. We also have the other side of communicating, advocating for patients, to systems, to care providers, to and nurses are pretty notorious for not being happy about evidence-based standardized guidelines where these people get this many hours of care or this many units of something. We see we focus on the difference that justifies something else. So communication at those higher policy levels is absolutely essential, and it's difficult in the context of the way we've organized healthcare work these days. It requires professional associations and schools and others that have voice to be able to use that in a constructive way. So that's why you'll see the Twitter account of the School of Nursing really demonstrating advocacy for some of these policy things and using the research and the good work of our graduate students to make that point.
So pivoting a bit and going back to applied science, can you tell us, and you briefly chatted about this before we started recording, your current role as Associate Dean and what that entails?
Yes, my role is Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs, which means supporting the processes that enable faculty to have productive careers. So we guide and support the heads, the department heads and the school directors in the hiring, in the career progress through promotion, reappointment, tenure. We also help support if there's a need for discipline or management, you know, all of those kinds of things, and then right through mentorship into retirement. And what I can say is that for department heads and school directors, their faculty members are very much, you know, like I would think of as our patients, they're very much their clients. They need them to be successful. They want them to be happy and productive and successful. And so they put their heart and soul into trying to create the conditions under which that can happen. And so it's great in our office to be able to be the first point of contact to reach out if there's a challenge or a worry or something like that, and to try and help resolve it.
Right.
Now, being a leader, you mentioned even before too that you were kind of yanked into those positions of leadership and that sort of thing, and you've also mentored graduate students, trainees, and all that sort of thing. So, do you find that it has come easy to you? And do you have any tips for like a mentor or a leader just starting out? How's been your experience with that?
Well, what I've observed is, you know, in engineering, people are kind of keen. You know, if you poll the faculty of any department, probably half of them would say, sure, I'd like to be head one day. In nursing, I think probably collectively, we've been a bit more hesitant to do that. We tend to value what we do to the extent that we don't want to be pulled into something that takes us away from it too much. So I did have to think long and hard. I didn't put my name forward when the time came and we had a failed search and we're in a little bit of a crisis in the school. So our colleagues all got together and said, who would we best support? How would we like to do this? And so, and that's been characteristic of us over time, to sort of have that discussion shared among us to say who steps forward. And it was only in that context that I was willing to do that. I love the role I had been in, and but I found that I loved the leadership role, and I really enjoyed the ability to do things that could make a difference for people, for staff, for students, and for faculty, and to be able to enact policies that could improve things. And so I worked quite hard to maintain some foot in teaching and research so that I could convince my colleagues that when their turn came, they didn't have to give those things up in order to take on a leadership role. And I do think that that is one of the obligations of leaders, to make it clear that one can do them all. And I think that giving up all of that would not have suited me very well. It would have, like cutting off an arm. But to be able to just do things a little bit differently. And I think we can do that when we mentor one another, when we talk to people who've been that path before, when we sort of recognize it as a real problem and talk about it. And I do think that, across the Faculty of Applied Science, we have a wonderful collection of heads, many of whom have come a similar path. Weren't sure that that's what they wanted, but have stepped up when they can see what they can bring to their discipline. And if we don't create the conditions under which they can't be that which they've been developing themselves to be for all of these years.
Right, for sure. So a couple questions a bit more lighter. We're curious, what do you do to unwind? I'm sure you have a hectic schedule.
I do. Well, I love walking and being in nature, and frankly, this COVID has created a little bit more opportunities. I'm lucky enough to be able to pop out into the woods if I have an hour between meetings on occasion. So I love being in nature and hiking and skiing and those kinds of things. So that's my number one unwind.
That's great. And is there any advice or lesson you would pass on to your younger self that you've learned?
Oh, yes. I think actually just trusting that it will all work out. I think it's so hard particularly in any position of responsibility, such as being a new head or director. It's very easy to take the worries that you see, the struggles that faculty are having, or the tensions between people or parts of the university. It's very easy to take that on and just have a feeling of panic that this is too complex, it's never going to sort itself out. And yet when you look back, you say, I couldn't have seen exactly how it would work out, but it does. And so you get good people and good processes and bring them together. And I think just trust that even these very, very complex issues that come up will work themselves out.
That's great.
That's funny. My mother-in-law is a retired registered nurse, and she speaks very much the same way. In so much as she's like get comfortable with uncertainty and understand that it's going to be okay, like that sort of thing. It's very, very similar advice. Okay, so last question, and again, thank you so much for your time. Are there any initiatives or projects or endeavors you're overseeing right now that you're really excited about and you think people should be excited about as well?
I think I'm extremely interested in the evolution of medical assistance in dying. That's been such a game changer, really, in healthcare, in which people facing that end part of life are having options that they didn't have before. And nursing has been very involved in the development of the evolving legislation around this. The issues like the definition of suffering, which we know how to do it legally when somebody has a car accident for monetary reasons. This is an entirely different kind of definition of what's existential suffering in the context of an ongoing condition, for example. So nursing is strongly situated in this, including in the legislation, which is different than most places in the world that don't mention the involvement of nursing, and nurses often are the place where those tentative questions, those still small voice of wondering what my options are, will come up in the clinical context, and choices have to be made, very, very morally, ethically complex choices with regard to how much information you give to people, whether you're pushing them in one direction or another, what's coercion versus what's providing people with information and advocacy, and how to guide patients and families through these processes so that they have an envelope of care from the first moment that they raise these through to their decisions, and the freedom to change their mind, and all of the ongoing bereavement and the complexity of bereavement in the context of knowing somebody was going to die on a particular day, which is not the history we have. So these are incredibly complex issues about which we have to do it right. We have to make sure that ethical errors and slips don't happen. But that Canadian people have made it clear that this is something that they want in the repertoire, and it's unlikely to go away. It's likely to progress. So to me, that's an incredibly exciting opportunity for those of us working in the field, and for my discipline to be able to make a meaningful contribution to people's lives, so that these planned deaths happen in a way that leaves memories that are intact, and that people's legacies can be left with having taken control and orchestrated the death that they wanted.
Absolutely. I can think of nothing more meaningful than that. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, thank you again, Sally, for speaking to us. You're both fascinating and have had an impactful career, and it's great to learn a little bit more about you. I've only emailed you a couple of times, so it's great to see you in person or by Zoom. And again, thank you, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.